That morning in Hiroshima, the sky was blue and cloudless. The sun was shining. The streetcars had begun making rounds, picking up people who were on their way to work. Hiroshima's 7 rivers flowed quietly through the city. The rays of the midsummer sun glittered on the surface of the rivers. Back in that peaceful, slow decade known as the 90s, I used to go to a rundown elementary school in the small town I was forced to live in because of my father's work. The school library, which was closed down for most of my student life for reasons unknown, and consisted of maybe 100 volumes, finally opened when I was in the 4th form. Since there was not much else to do in that hick part of the country for a nerdy bookworm like me, I became the school librarian. I was tasked with cleaning up the tiny matchbox of a room in which the books were imprisoned so rudely, and cataloguing them before the mold, spiders, and mildew finally reduced them to their constituting elements. The library itself was a curious affair which doubled as a science room, perhaps 2 by 4 meters, and contained the odds and ends of the locals' bookshelves. Some of the tomes dated as far back as the early 60s. I distinctly remember that, apart from an inappropriately sexual Tarzan comic from God knows when, the rest of the books were a mixture of overly simplistic children's stories and popular science volumes. It was a little volume on the Hiroshima bombing with bright, fiery red illustrations straight out of Hades. I still remember the frequent nightmares I used to have for weeks after reading it as a child. Yet it made me feel a sensation of grief the like of which I've never felt before. I remember crying. 20 years later, my mind still wanders back to it from time to time. Today was such a day, so I decided to track it down and share it with you. Hiroshima no Pika by Maruki Toshi begins with a description of peaceful Hiroshima on that fateful August day. While other cities across Japan are subject to deadly air raids, Hiroshima has been relatively spared damage. We are introduced to the book's protagonist, 7-year-old Mi, as she breakfasts on a meager meal of baked sweet potatoes with her family. Suddenly, this quiet scenery is interrupted by a bright flashing light, first white and then fiery orange. Mi, who is knocked over by the force of the blast, suddenly finds herself in the ruins of what was once her childhood home. Mi and her mother escape the rubble under which they were buried, only to find her father trapped in the flames. Mi's mother finally manages to save her father, who is badly hurt. She hurriedly bandages his wounds, and in a feat of strength, she carries her wounded husband on her back. In a daze, they run away from their burning home and towards the river. The riverbank is an agonizing tableau of children in burning rags, their eyes swollen shut, and their wounds bleeding. The burnt and broken bodies of what were once men and women litter the streets, piling up on top of one another. Mi and her parents continue their desperate escape. She sees a swallow whose wings have been burnt. The body of a dead man floats down the river. Beside him, the body of a dead cat. A mother whose infant had died lets the river wash her away. Then the black rain comes. Unbeknownst to me, it is teeming with radioactive particles from the bomb. They continue running. They finally reach the beach outside of Hiroshima, narrowly escaping death. They collapse, not knowing the time of day. The nights come and go in a daze. 3 days pass. Mi receives her first meal from a dying old woman. Firemen come and go. Soldiers take away the dead. Mi and her parents move to the local school, which has now been turned into a field hospital. But the overwhelmed doctors are not much help. There is neither bandages nor medicine. Mi and her mother wade back through the broken city. There is nothing left of their home. The city is a barren wasteland of burnt wood and dusty rubble. The day is August the 9th, and the second bomb has already been dropped on Nagasaki. Many more are dead. The survivors are homeless and in clutches of despair. Years pass. Mi still hasn't grown an inch. She complains of random pains and itches. Her mother pulls out a shard of glass from her head. It's been embedded there all those years ago by the force of the blast. Her father suddenly starts losing a great amount of hair. He vomits blood and gets grotesque purple spots all over his body. He dies. Many people have died over the years from the effects of radiation, thinking they have been spared the effects of the bomb. Every year, the people of Hiroshima write the names of the dead on lanterns and release them onto the river. This year, Mi writes father on one and swallow on another and lets them float down the river. Mi finds herself thinking, this won't happen again. Not if nobody drops a bomb ever again. Toshi Maruki was a Japanese artist born 1912. His work famously dealt with the aftermath of the atomic bombs. In 1953, Toshi mentions, he was holding a small exhibition of his Hiroshima panels in Hokkaido when a woman, a victim of the bomb, wandered in. Overwhelmed by the sensations Toshi's artworks created in her, she takes up a microphone and tells a story which would later become Hiroshima no Pika. Toshi wrote Pika based on the woman's memories. Despite having no children or grandchildren of his own, he wrote it for all grandchildren everywhere, hoping the new young generation would have better sense than to let this tragedy repeat all over again. Toshi and his wife, Iri Maruki, famously composed the Hiroshima panels, a series of 15 painted folding panels depicting the harrowing aftermath of the atomic bombs. The series took over 32 years to finish and earned them the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995. Toshi passed away in the year 2000. What more can I say about this book other than that it had lasted with me after 20 years? Toshi Maruki's prose is indeed a haunting one. It is every bit as affecting as it is simple. The book itself is shy of 60 pages from cover to cover. It is illustrated throughout with crimson and orange pictures of suffering and pain, at times covering whole pages. All illustrations are the work of Toshi's own somber brush. But the story itself is as ghostly and as spectral as the pictures. Toshi's pen is nebulous and shadowy on paper. It moves with the swift feet of a ghost in a dream or an apparition in fog. As you might expect from a book targeted towards children, there are no complicated turns of phrase, no $10 words. Yet every word strikes heavy as a boulder, a testament to the heartfelt emotions that motivated him to write it. Take the contents of the page before last, the image of a young girl whose growth has been arrested by radiation, that of a piece of shrapnel slowly emerging to the surface over a span of years, or that of a man suddenly turning pale and dying, are all ones that lasted with me a lifetime. Yet they are all conveyed within one single page. The image of a black radioactive rain falling on survivors, or the sordid rainbow that emerged after the rain had stopped, both take up one sentence each. Yet I distinctly remembered them some 20 years after I first read them. The book concludes with the message Toshi and his wife spent their artistic lives spreading. Let us spare our children the horror. After reading the book, I could not help but agree. Hiroshima no Pika is a children's book. It was written for all grandchildren everywhere. It is written in a manner children can fully understand, but it is in every way equally suited for adults. Reading it as a man of 29 years did not fail to impress me every bit as it had when I was a mere lad of 10. I would recommend it, perhaps, much more to adults, lest they be doomed to repeat history. Thank you for joining me for another book review, and I bid you all peace.